No band sounded like an earthquake the way that The Who did. Thunderous bass, drums crashing like lightning, and a voice that could shake the rafters. These guys didn't just play music, they turned every stage into a battlefield. What made The Who special wasn't just the noise, it was the way that they told stories with it. A band that blew the doors off rock and rewrote the rules of what a live show could be. Sure, the Rolling Stones may have drawn up the blueprint for what rock and roll is, but The Who took that template, set it on fire, and reimagined what rock could become. Welcome to episode 3 of For Beginners, and as if there wasn't any other way, today we're diving headfirst into The Who. The Beginners. In 1961, Roger Daltrey pulled a neighborhood band together called the Detours. He brought in his friend John Entwistle on bass, and then not long after, Pete Townshend joined them on guitar. For a while, they played small clubs under that name, but there was one thing that was missing, and that was the drummer. They went through a few early players, including Doug Sandham, but nothing quite clicked. Then in 1964, two big things happened. One, they dropped the name The Detours and finally rebranded themselves as The Who. And second, Keith Moon stormed into the picture. The story goes that he showed up at one of their gigs, sat in on drums, and then played with so much fire that he nearly broke the kit. That was the moment that the classic lineup was born: Daltrey, Townshend, Entwistle, and Moon. Four names that together lit the fuse on one of the loudest, most electrifying bands in rock and roll history. Pete Townshend grew up in West London, the son of two musicians. He studied art before diving headfirst into rock and roll, and it shows. His songs always had a sense of storytelling and design. Pete became the guitarist, the main songwriter, and the main story behind the iconic windmill strum and the guitar smashing theatrics. Roger Daltrey was working class through and through. He left school early, learned metalwork, and carried around a toughness that never really left him. But it was his golden, roaring voice that made him unforgettable. As The Who's frontman, Roger turned raw frustration into power and gave the band its defiant swagger. John Entwistle, nicknamed the Ox, grew up in a more studious, quieter background. He trained on brass instruments before settling in on bass guitar, which gave him an unusually technical style. Reserved offstage, he let his instrument do the talking, laying down bass lines that were so thunderous and complex that they reshaped how people thought about the bass guitar in rock music. And then there's the legendary Keith Moon. Also born in London, he was a hyperactive kid and always had more energy than people really knew what to do with. Behind the drum kit, that energy became his superpower. Wild, reckless, and completely unpredictable. He turned every live performance into controlled chaos, and his explosive style helped define The Who's live reputation. 4 different upbringings, 4 different personalities, but together they stood as the defiant proof that music can fuse even the most unlikely personalities into one unstoppable force. The Who didn't just play rock and roll, they expanded what it could be. Their early hit, My Generation, became an anthem for youth rebellion, capturing the frustration the world doesn't really take you seriously. And what also made it work is that every member of the band was a virtuoso in their own right. Townshend pioneered power chords and feedback. Daltrey's voice could roar and soar. Entwistle's bass revolutionized the rules of rock. And Keith Moon's drumming turned chaos into rhythm. That brilliance is written right into Baba O'Reilly, a stadium anthem and a technical marvel that proved that The Who weren't just loud, they were also brilliant. The Who's impact wasn't subtle, it was seismic. The Who left behind a catalog packed with anthems. Their breakout single, My Generation, in 1965 gave voice to teenage frustration and became one of the most iconic songs of the decade. Around the same time, they had hits like Substitute and I Can't Explain, sharp, punchy tracks that became mod anthems in Britain. By 1967, they were experimenting with songs like I Can See for Miles, their first real US hit, and one of the most powerful singles of that era. Then came 1969 and the rock opera Tommy, which produced the worldwide hit Pinball Wizard and solidified their reputation for creativity. The early 70s, in my opinion, marked their peak. In 1971, Baba O'Riley, better known by its opening line, Teenage Wasteland, blended synthesizers and thunderous rock and instantly became a stadium anthem. The same album gave us Behind Blue Eyes and the explosive Won't Get Fooled Again, and closed with one of the most iconic screams in rock history. And even as the decade rolled in, The Who kept on delivering. 5:15 and Love Reigned Over Me from Quadrophenia in 1973 showed their storytelling power. And Who Are You in 1978 proved that they could still craft stadium anthems more than a decade into their career. Each of these songs has lived on for decades, not as radio staples, but as cultural touchstones. And these kind of tracks define what rock and roll truly is. Think of The Who's albums like Chapters in a Book, Raw Beginnings, Bold Experiments, and eventually full-blown epics that defined what rock and roll could be. They kicked off with My Generation in 1965, a raw snapshot of London's mod scene. A youth movement of sharp suits, scooters, and rebellion. That's a whole story in itself, and honestly, a scene that we could do an entire video on one day. Just a couple of years later, they stretched their imagination with The Who's Sell Out, a quirky concept album that played like a pirate radio broadcast. If you've ever seen the movie Pirate Radio, that's the world that The Who were playing into. Rebellious DJs, wild ads, and music that felt like freedom over the airwaves. Why do I have a spot right there? It's not me. Then came Tommy in 1969, a rock opera that turned them into international superstars and proved that rock could tell stories on a grand scale. That momentum carried them into Who's Next in 1971. It's packed with stadium-shaking anthems like Baba O'Riley and Won't Get Fooled Again. 2 years later, Quadrophenia dug even deeper, a gritty cinematic journey that is often seen as their masterpiece. And by the time they released Who Are You in 1978, more than a decade in, The Who had shown a rare ability to keep reinventing themselves while delivering powerful, era-defining records. If there's one place The Who built their legend, it was on stage. They weren't just loud, they were destructive. Townshend smashing guitars, Daltrey whipping the mic, and Keith Moon detonating behind the drums. At Monterey Pop in 1967, they left the crowd stunned with guitar smashing and literal explosions. At Woodstock 2 years later, they blasted My Generation into the sunrise. And on TV, Keith Moon literally blew up his drum set on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, singeing Pete's hair and leaving him partially deaf for the rest of his life. And hey, if you're ever in Austin, Texas, you can catch my coworker Mike Atkins at Pete's Dueling Piano Bar on 6th Street. He does my favorite version of Baba O'Riley, and he's there over at Pete's Piano Bar 4 to 5 nights a week. I've linked his socials in the description. Trust me, he's definitely worth seeing. So where do The Who stand in rock history? For me, they were the band that proved that chaos could be art. They smashed guitars, they screamed anthems, and somehow they turned that madness into music that still shakes arenas half a century later. Their influence is everywhere. Punk bands borrowed their aggression. Arena giants borrowed their anthems. And artists from Van Halen to the Ramones carried their forward mix of rebellion and brilliance. Culturally, they proved that rock could be more than noise. It could be chaos, it could be art, it could be theater. And decades later, that opening sequence in Baba O'Riley or that scream in Won't Get Fooled Again still hits with the same electricity. Thanks for watching episode 3 of For Beginners. If you've enjoyed this dive into The Who, hit the like button, subscribe, and comment down below. I would love to hear your suggestions. The series is definitely all about the journey, and I would love for you to come along with me. And if you want to follow along on Patreon, I post all of my stuff over on there for free, and I will be posting more stuff as the channel and the community grows. Link is in the description, along with my newly formed website. So thanks for coming on this journey with me. I'll see you in the next episode of For Beginners.